For 27 years, she was nothing but a charcoal sketch on a corkboard, a pair of hollow eyes, a vague jawline, and a case number. The official narrative was swift and absolute. A nameless transient pulled from a Texas lake, ruled an accident, buried in an unmarked grave. But the sketch was a lie. Not because the artist lacked skill, but because the system that commissioned it never intended to find the truth. It took 27 years for science to look at that drawing and annihilate it completely. The drawing is haunting in how generic it is. Shoulder-length dark hair, a slight tilt to the head. If you walked past this composite sketch on a police bulletin board in 1998, your eyes would glide right over it. It looks like nobody. And that was exactly the point. Lake Ray Hubbard is a massive, sprawling reservoir just outside Dallas. It's a recreational hotspot, a place for speedboats and weekend anglers. But on a grim day in 1998, a body surfaced. The local authorities had a problem on their hands. A dead woman in the water meant paperwork, detectives, and uncomfortable questions from the local media. The official narrative was swift and absolute. She was written off as a transient, probably a drifter. No signs of trauma, so it was an accidental drowning. Case closed before the case had even been given a name. They scraped together a description, handed it to a sketch artist, and buried her in a local cemetery with a concrete marker. Jane Doe. History is a fragile construct, largely written by those who survived to hold the pen. In this case, the pen was held by a county medical examiner's office that needed to clear its books. The sketch wasn't an investigative tool, it was a tombstone. Once the dirt was thrown over her coffin, the institution had successfully protected its reputation. No murder. No manhunt, no failure to protect, just a nameless woman who presumably didn't matter to anyone anyway. But there was a detail they conveniently ignored. A detail buried in the autopsy report that didn't fit their neat little accidental drifter narrative. She had extensive, high-quality dental work. Fillings, crowns, the kind of expensive reconstructive care that a transient living on the streets does not receive. Someone had paid for that dental work. Someone had sat in a waiting room while she was in the chair. Which means somewhere out there, a family was waiting for a woman who had simply vanished into the mud of Lake Ray Hubbard, erased by a system that couldn't be bothered to look too closely. The establishment had its story, but the uncompromising, unbribable precision of modern genetics was waiting in the dark, and it does not accept institutional excuses. A fragment of bone, degraded by decades of Texas heat and lake water. That is all that was left of the woman from Ray Hubbard. When a cold case task force finally exhumed her remains, they sent the bone to a cutting-edge forensic genomics lab. The scientists weren't looking for a quick answer. They were looking for a genetic fingerprint hidden inside shattered, waterlogged DNA. Their first move was the obvious one, the one law enforcement has relied on since the 1990s. They ran the sample through CODIS. CODIS is the FBI's combined DNA index system. It's a massive database, but it has a critical, structural blind spot that most people don't understand. CODIS is not a people finder. It is a suspect matcher. It only works if the exact person you're looking for has already been arrested, convicted, or processed through the system at some point. You drop a sample in, and CODIS scans for one thing and one thing only: a direct, identical genetic match. Your DNA against a known offender's DNA, brother against brother. Exact copy against exact copy. Penny Gunn had never been arrested. She had never been convicted. Her DNA had never been entered into any law enforcement database anywhere in the country. So when the lab ran her degraded bone sample through CODIS, the system churned, searched, and returned exactly what it was always going to return. Nothing. This is why the case sat dead for 27 years. Not because the technology didn't exist in 1998. CODIS was operational. But CODIS is a closed loop. It can only confirm what it already knows. If your victim isn't in the system, and your suspect isn't in the system, CODIS is a locked door with no key. The investigators needed a tool that didn't require the answer to already be sitting in a filing cabinet. They turned to investigative genetic genealogy. It operates on a completely different logic. It doesn't need to find Penny, it just needs to find anyone related to Penny. Scientists extracted the shattered genetic code from the bone fragment and sequenced it, mapping out hundreds of thousands of microscopic data points, single nucleotide polymorphisms, tiny variations in the genetic alphabet that are shared among blood relatives but unique enough to fingerprint a specific family branch. They uploaded this raw genetic data into a public genealogy database used by millions of everyday people to build family trees. People who had voluntarily spit into a tube to find out if they were part Irish or part German, completely unaware their DNA was about to crack a murder case. The algorithm began working backward. It didn't look for Penny. It scanned the database for people who shared long, identical stretches of DNA with the bone sample, the kind of stretches that only appear when two people share a common ancestor within the last 4 to 6 generations. The hits started coming in. Second cousins, third cousins, once removed. The computer plotted each match on a massive digital family tree, calculating exactly how these distant relatives connected to each other and, by extension, to the unknown woman. This is where the magic happens, or rather, where the cold, mechanical logic of triangulation takes over. Each individual match is meaningless on its own, but when you overlay 3 or 4 or 5 distant cousin matches onto the same family tree, a single intersection point emerges. The point where all those branches converge. That convergence point is not a cousin, it's a grandparent, an ancestor, the genetic epicenter of the unknown woman's bloodline. The algorithm didn't stop at surnames. It factored in geographic clustering, which branches of the tree still lived in the same regions as their ancestors, generation after generation. It factored in generational timelines. How old would the descendants of this specific branch be in the late 1990s? It narrowed the pool from 330 million Americans down to a single, distinct family lineage rooted firmly in the American South. The investigators stared at the branches on their screens. The tree was pointing to one very specific geographic and generational pocket. Keep that detail in mind. It's about to matter a lot more than you think. They cross-referenced this genetic lineage with missing persons reports from the late 1990s. A single name surfaced from the database, attached to a woman who had vanished without a trace just 1 year before the body was pulled from the lake. They tracked down the family. A quick swab of a known relative. The lab ran a direct mitochondrial DNA comparison. The computer generated the results. It was a flawless, undeniable match. The name on the missing persons report was Penny Gunn. Penny was not a transient. She was a mother. She was a daughter. She was a woman from Oklahoma with a life, a history, and a family that had spent nearly 3 decades agonizing over what happened to her. The charcoal sketch that hung in the Texas police station bore almost no resemblance to her actual face. The official narrative wasn't just wrong, it was a fabrication built to avoid the embarrassment of an unsolved death in their jurisdiction. The DNA results definitively, undeniably proved it. Penny Gunn, approaching 0 probability of error. The debate is over. Science has spoken, and the myth of the nameless drifter is dead. But the verdict raises a darker question. Penny Gunn vanished in 1997. Her body was found in a Texas lake in 1998. If the Rockwall County authorities had identified her in 1998, they would have had to investigate a missing woman from another state found dead in their water. They would have had to search for a killer. So who benefited from her staying nameless? The genetic data forces us to look at a system that took one look at a complicated interstate case and chose the easiest way out, bearing the evidence and the identity in one swift act. Penny Gunn finally has her name back, but the investigation into how she ended up in that lake and why the people in power fought so hard to keep her a nobody is only just beginning. This is what happens when you pair relentless science with an unsolved mystery. The institutions hide, but the bones always talk. There are over 60,000 John and Jane Does sitting in unmarked graves across the United States right now, hiding behind lazy official narratives and failed police work. We are cracking them open, one by one. If you want to be here when the next cover-up falls, you need to subscribe. The truth doesn't stay buried forever, but only if you know where to dig.